Two, one. I'll let the room go ahead and start to fill here. Welcome, everybody, to this session of the Basketball Embassy's Virtual Coaches Clinic, the Global Summit. And very excited today to have a discussion, dialogue with Alan Keane and Mark Bennett. We've had both coaches before for sessions here, and we're going to do something a little different. We're going to basically just have a conversation with both coaches and talk about some of the areas of coaching that sometimes maybe we don't really address, either because of maybe a fear of not knowing what to do, or just maybe acknowledging the fact that I need help and I'm not sure where to go to get that help. And so let's do this. Mark, I'd like to start with you and talk to us a little bit about needs-based coaching. I know this is an area that you specialize in. This is what you have talked around the world about. Kind of give us an overview of what exactly that is.
Well, yeah, so the need-centered, I'll credit Alan for coming up with the two words. My journey's been a good 30 years of exploring and finding out how we can get people within teams and individuals to think for themselves, self-manage themselves, understand, make effective decisions, be able to manage their state, and allow coaches, trainers, managers to understand what tools do they need. One, to be aware of themselves. Secondly, how to recognize what's going on, and then have the skills to know what interventions are put in and how to manage those interventions with an aim to make yourself redundant. So often this was called athlete-centered, person-centered. The challenge has been over the last 10 years, and I've been doing this 30 years, it's become very fashionable. The problem is Alan has been through the same journey. What we're seeing over the last 10 years is not our interpretation of athlete-centered. So when Alan and I discussed, and we've had these problems again of people putting us in that box, Alan said, well, why don't we call it need-centered? Because everything I've spoke about is understanding what is the need for the athlete and the player and the team, and facilitating that need, still with the aim to make yourself redundant, but actually always beginning with the end in mind, but focused on the need in the moment, and understanding how to adapt based on the moment and not just plan what you had on a piece of paper. So in the short term, that's the aim. A coach to make themselves redundant. Redundant being you can have a self-managing, self-aware team that can scan effectively while managing their own state, make effective decisions based on what they see, commit with intent 100%, and then evaluate the choice and the execution separately while interacting effectively with teammates and accepting feedback and helping teammates manage their own state. In the same process, being able to take feedback from the coach, but with a coach understanding what to say in a moment to get the best out of the players without taking over. So that's my short version, if that's any good.
No, I think that's a very good start. I like that as a frame here for this conversation. So Alan, what led you to not only want to work with Mark to do a deep dive into what Mark does, but basically to have a kind of a mentoree relationship with him and have him work with you and help you become a more effective coach?
Well, first of all, I'll say everything Mark talked about there is incredibly in-depth. And Mark, it rolled off your tongue. And I was listening to you going, if this is my first time hearing this stuff, it's just gone boom. So yes. I found it quite funny, actually. But listen, the reason, I think, if I peel it all the way back to why I wanted a mentor and how I ended up meeting Mark and the value I see in it and what the turning point for that was, if I answer it in those three phases, first of all, I was very aware at the beginning of my coaching career that I was where I was, and I was at the level of understanding of how to coach and the intricacies of coaching, at that particular time. And as the journey's gone, I'm still very aware, and I credit probably my mother and my upbringing for that. I was never somebody that thought I was better than what I was at anything. And I think that was a starting point for me on my journey with Mark, and a big part of my journey with PDS, that I'm happy. I want to be self-aware. I want to be more aware, and I'm not concerned about what that looks like when I open myself up and say, well, who am I as a basketball coach? Who am I as a person? I'm very much wired to go in that direction. So when I met Mark, I met him through like a UK coaching clinic, a UK coaching program, Aspire program it was. And part of that 18 months program was that we were going to have an opportunity to be paired up with a mentor. So we did almost like a speed dating session. And we set with these 15 different mentors, 5-minute slots, you know, kind of a quick get to know, figure them out, like what can they offer us kind of thing in terms of being a mentor. And when I spoke with Mark for those 5 minutes, as soon as I got up from the chair, I knew I didn't need to speak to anybody else, because I felt at that time Mark was a straight talker. He still is. Mark was a straight talker in my first interaction with him. You know, in a short space of time, he really sold, not sold to me, but like the value I took from it was, here's a guy who's speaking a language I want to know more about, who's talking about athletes making decisions for themselves. And I was thinking as an ex-player, geez, I wish I had that skill myself. I don't know how to teach that to players. I really want to know more, how to be the best version of myself, and how to peel that back and start from scratch and go through that building process. You know, and this was all in a 5-minute window. And I remember asking Mark, I said, Mark, can you give me an example of one of your mentees, a journey that you went on with one of your mentees? What did it look like? And, you know, Mark was like, well, you know, we agreed to certain parameters. We agreed to certain guidelines. You know, that person didn't follow through. So we no longer are going on the journey. I'm no longer mentoring that person. I remember thinking, that's exactly who I need as a mentor, somebody that's going to keep me in check with what I agree to. We're not going to go for just a coffee and be buddy. This is about performance, about my performance, about the performance of my players, the performance of my team, and enhancing our performance as a group. And it's starting with me. So I saw the value straight away, because that's what I saw in Mark the first time I met him. As the journey went on, you know, my first interaction with Mark on a formal basis was he came into the school I was working in London at the time, you know, and he gave me a little insight into actually what excellence was. You know, I remember we sat down in an office and, you know, we talked about what excellence was, and Mark's definition, which you may have heard already, Layson, is, you know, doing the best you can with what you have in the present moment. It wasn't driven by results. It wasn't driven by outcomes. It was driven by your behavior as a coach, your behavior as an athlete, your behavior as a team. And what do I mean by that? The level of commitment to the choice you make in the moment. And, you know, when Mark kind of unboxed that one for me, and it was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. And I'd been working in a national team program at that level for about 5 or 6 years at that point, 5 years. And I'd been around a lot of high competent people in the basketball world, but I'd never heard anybody talk about, you know, excellence or success is basically doing the best you can with what you have in the present moment. So whatever decision you make, it's not a wrong decision. It's only a wrong decision when you don't fully commit. You know, when we went along that journey of, you know, having those meetings, and Mark jumped on court then with the national team, and, you know, that was a crazy experience for me. And I spoke about it on one of these clinics previously with you guys. And, you know, what I saw Mark do with a basketball team, an international basketball team, in one session, he took the session over. You know, I saw the value immediately. You know, that the session was engaged, active. A high level of learning was taking place, and Mark doesn't know basketball, technical, tactical rules even. But, you know, it was a lot to do with how can he enhance the behavior, the choices, the commitment level of the players, so they're giving their best. And it came down to just facilitating the session for them to do that. So based on those type of experiences, Layson, it was very easy for me to gravitate towards Mark. And, you know, Mark, I'd like to think we've moved on a long way since then, since that session with the national team and the session at Lambton School. You know, we've gone on and done really interesting stuff, such as in the classroom, Layson, with, you know, teachers, science teachers, maths teachers, English teachers, senior leadership, you know, newly qualified teachers. We've used somebody, Mark drove it, but obviously I supported it in the school I was working in. And it's been a really interesting journey and fantastic. My best, no question, my best form of development as a basketball coach has come through the support from Mark.
So, Alan, this must have been a huge paradigm shift, because, you know, let's be honest, as coaches, we're so used to being in that controlling, dominant mode and kind of operating. I think sometimes we're operating more from fear-based, you know, coaching, versus here, you know, now we're putting so much into the trust of the players and giving them more control versus the coach taking control. I mean, how did you handle that? I mean, how did that paradigm shift you know, occur with you?
Well, it's like I started off saying, really, I guess when I'm lucky, I think, that, you know, I was raised in a way where I always knew there was I wanted to be better at whatever I was doing. And I still feel that way. At the moment, I'm playing chess, and I want to get better at chess. You know, I'm currently doing some DIY stuff in the garden. I'm trying to get better at that. So I think I was lucky that I was raised to have a growth mindset, you know, where I wanted to be better, and I was always welcoming of other people's opinions. So was it a paradigm shift? It wasn't massive, Layson, to be honest, for me. It wasn't a massive paradigm shift. It was in terms of when I was under pressure. So to have Mark in on the practices, it's always a bit nervy, even for me now, because, you know, I know Mark will see stuff that I don't see. And I know we'll talk about it after, and I'll be kicking myself going, oh, I should have seen that. You know, I should have clocked that one. But I think in the competitive environment, it is a paradigm shift. It was a massive paradigm shift for me, for sure. But when I say competitive environment, was Mark sat on the bench with us against Holland when we played him in an international game. And that wasn't easy for me. That was a challenge. But, you know, that's really accelerating the process. But when Mark's in on the practices, or was back then, it wasn't a massive paradigm shift. It became a case of, I had to think at the time. I think when I reflect back to it, I was having to think a lot about my delivery, like, you know, how I'm facilitating the session. It really helped me to self-reflect. It really helped me to unpick the value of what I was doing. And it really begged the question for the first time in my coaching career, you know, what value am I adding to the players with how I coach this practice? What value am I adding to the team, to the individuals, my assistant coaches, with how I build, facilitate, and deliver this practice session? And, you know, I mean, we can go down a rabbit hole here, Layson, but it impacted session plan. It impacted how I engage with the players, with the assistant coaches. It impacted my communication skills. And when I say impact, I mean impact in a positive way. And some things were harder than others, for sure. And for me, it was always the performance element, because as a national team coach, you are tied to the score somewhat. And that's the hardest part to really kind of separate yourself from, when you're committing to excellence and doing the best you can in the present moment. I'll tell you a quick story, actually. I remember coming back from the European Championship, you know, early on in the days. Mark's been working with me, and I felt like I made a major mistake in one game against Latvia that cost us the game. And you know, I kind of hung on to that, and it haunted me for quite a while. And I remember I drove down to Mark's house, actually, and we talked, and I said to Mark, I think I made a big mistake, and, you know, I regret the decision I made. And Mark's simple question to me was, well, at that time, did you have more information, or did you go with what you thought was the best thing at that particular time? I said, yeah, at that moment in time, I felt that was the right thing to do. We said, well, that's it then. You committed to excellence in that moment. Now, when you have a cold review after and you reflect back on it, of course, but, you know, it's just little things like that I think having a mentor, and Mark, don't take this the wrong way, because we've never gone out for coffee and marshmallows or any of that stuff, but having a mentor who's honest with you, but honest in a way where it lands the right way. Like, I've never felt with Mark mentoring me that I've done something wrong. I've never felt like I've done anything wrong. I've never felt threatened or pressure. I've never felt pressure from Mark. I've felt like he's relentless in a positive way, not relentless in like it's forceful, but he's very consistent. And there's a lot of support that comes with that consistency, you know, a lot of support. But Mark, you know, what I found with a mentor like Mark is I never had any negative feelings. And I always came away from one-to-one sessions with Mark, be it by the phone or face-to-face, or having him on a practice session, which was always awesome. I always came away from that more energetic. I felt full of life. I felt more energetic because I felt I got better while he was there. And, you know, we had this conversation a couple of years ago, Mark. I felt like I regressed because he wasn't around as much, or my time with him had come to an end formally. And I felt I regressed a lot. And we found a way to make that work again. But, yeah.
Mark, so I guess I really two questions based on what Alan just shared. Number one, when coaches come to you and approach you and ask you to work with them, is it because they're in a situation where everything's just going to hell, so to speak, and they just really need help? Or is it, hey, I just have an awareness that I need to do a better job and I need help with that? Kind of walk us through just that, you know, the mentality of coaches that you work with, you know, at the beginning, and then how does that relationship look? What does it look like? How does it work? let's say maybe on a daily, weekly, monthly basis?
Well, there's three ways I initiate working with someone. It's either, and I'm more well known now, so I get more people just that I've never met, just contacting me. It's either they want to be a great coach and they're passionate and they're putting the time in, but they're not getting the results they want, and they're a bit lost. And they've listened to a podcast or they've heard something, go, actually, something I heard resonated with me. I'd like to explore more. Or they have a self-awareness, actually, that they recognize what's missing and they don't have the tools to upskill themselves in that competency they recognize I do. The third one, which is potentially the most challenging, is their boss gets me in. And their boss recognizes that they need support in some area of coaching, whether they're lost, they feel them in a negative spiral, or they feel they're not getting the best out of the players. So the boss pulls me in, and initially the coaches may not even want me there. So that's up to me then to actually let them know, look, I'm not here to criticize your coaching. I'm here to really understand why you coach the way you do. And if I can add value and raise your awareness and stuff that'll have impact on your players, will you be interested? I think the whole thing about relationships is understanding that athlete-centered, that a lot of people call, where we have this thing where we say, well, it's about asking a lot of questions and it's person first and it's about caring. A lot of this can be really misunderstood. The way I look at it is my relationship with a mentor must be the same relationship as a coach to a player. There should be no difference. You need to be open. You need to be aware of your own state. You need to understand that you're there for a reason to have a positive impact. And you need to set clarity at the beginning about the expectations and the relationship. And then once you set those expectations of what it looks like, you have to hold yourself accountable for them. You have to be honest with the very things you've agreed with that coach, the same as I'm asking for a coach to do with their players. So the beautiful thing about my principles is they're not different from a coach using with the players. So when I'm using it with a coach or a teacher or a manager, it's exactly the same. The language is the same, the terminology is the same. It begins with self-awareness first of yourself, identifying then the difference between where you want to be and where you are, not always having the answers to facilitate the interventions, but understanding then trust somebody, so that could be me or anybody else, that will come in that you value and you recognize can fill that gap for you. And I wouldn't say I'm for everyone. I would say that because I am relentless based on what we pre-agree. And some people aren't used to that. So it can be really unnerving initially when I come in. And I would say I'm definitely better than what was many years ago in that I'm now asking questions and I'm inquisitive based on why someone says a general statement to me. So I ask a coach to review and it's generalized, or they start referencing score lines. And I am relentless inquisitive about, what do you mean by that? Well, what if this happens? What's your understanding of this? How have you come to that conclusion? And some people have never had that before. I was with a baseball team in the States not so long ago, a Major League Baseball team. And when I went to one of the minor leagues, I was doing my inquisitive, asking questions. And Alan, I'm sure he'll tell you, I never tell somebody what they need to do. I inquisitively ask why they do the things they do. And I came away, and what was a real shift for them, which was an eye-opener for me, in America with the coach development, they don't really have people like me that come in and ask those inquisitive questions. But actually, if you answer, you still go deeper. But yeah, but explain this. I really want to understand. And I came away from that, and the feedback to them was, this guy's come in and just ripped us apart and told us how we should coach. So now you need to be aware that, look, you need to develop a relationship, a rapport, the same as a coach does with a player. So the quicker I can get to understand the person, the quicker we can establish our relationship and what our lighthouse is. What are we working towards? And how do we work together if we don't do what we say we're going to do? Or, we feel uncomfortable about things. Are we going to have those conversations? And do we both recognize we do it for the right reasons? Even if we disagree, it's okay. The relationship can still be strong. It's not about us agreeing with each other and massaging each other's egos and think everything's great, because adherence mentoring is not about that. My whole sole purpose as a mentor to a coach is to help the coach help themselves as a person be more comfortable, aware of what they're doing, why they're doing it, and the choices they make, and help them develop the players they're working with. That's my sole intent. There's no hidden agenda. So when you're pure and honest with that, you tend to form very, very strong relationships with coaches. But a coach needs to be someone that, it's not about being thinking that you're more open or you're vulnerable. It's not about vulnerability. It's about recognizing I'm, as a coach, whether I'm a volunteer or I'm a high paid coach, I'm here for a reason. And if I do not set my own standards of pursuing my own excellence, of being the best I can be, but I'm expecting my players every day to actually be open to change, to self-analyzing things, to grow, to do things uncomfortable you've never done before. If I'm expecting them as my athletes to do it, but I'm not doing it myself, I'm a bit of a hypocrite to the values that I'm sharing with my players. So any good coach that I've ever worked with, I always have a strong relationship with, because they're doing it for the reasons, because they want to help themselves, help the players. And I think that's the key thing. The difference between sitting down and having a cup of coffee and thinking there's an elephant in the corner, let's not talk about that thing, let's just have a cup of coffee. That's not adherence mentoring. Adherence mentoring is about supporting the change of a coach and helping them recognize the gaps, and then having an awareness of how to communicate to help support some tools to fill those gaps. But it's got to start with the self-recognition, and it's got to start with being to honoring the relationship that you agree with them from day one. And that's where the trust builds.
Alan,
well, how's it been? Yeah, I was just saying with Alan, how's that been for you? It's a bit like when you mentioned that thing about mistake, Alan, wasn't it? In that point of, I said to you, well, actually, with the information you had at the time, did you go with what you believe was the right decision? And you said yes. So the point of then is, well, that's not a mistake. Now you have data that you didn't know before. And if you were to do that again, you'd do it differently. But that's because you have new data. And it's kind of that type relationship where a coach can be really honest with you, knowing no one's going to tell you you're doing bad. Actually, it's someone I know I can speak to. I'm going to get honest feedback. And the whole sole purpose is to help me be a better coach. And that's pretty much how we've developed, isn't it, Alan, with you?
Yeah, and I use that with the players now, Mark. You know, I mean, it's because players will always feel like they've made a mistake. And, you know, one of the things I say most, especially to the players who are with us in their first year, whether it's the pro guys or the academy guys, like they'll beat themselves up about a poor decision they make, and they'll say it was a bad decision. And my thing is always to them, and which I've got from you, obviously, and which you helped me apply to myself. I say to them, look, AJ, did you fully commit to the choice you made? Yeah. Then it wasn't a mistake. Simple as that. Did you fully commit? Yeah, I gave it everything, but the outcome wasn't what you wanted. But it wasn't failure. Failure is when you don't fully commit to the choice you make in the present moment. And, you know, you helped me with that process, Mark, but I'm using that with players on a weekly basis, particularly from the month of September right up until after Christmas, until when it's new for them, when they're new guys that come to us. But yeah, I've taken that on board for sure. But it's more importantly for me now that I help players take that on board.
And there's two things with that, Alan, isn't there? There's one is in that moment with that player, if we use that scenario, if the player felt, actually, I should have gone with a different decision, I didn't go with the decision I thought was right, I went for a different one, then that would have been a mistake, even if you committed to it, because you're not actually collating the data, then going with what you believed was right in the moment. And that's the key thing about teaching players to be able to self-review after the action of separate choice and execution, so they can make a conclusion within a second. It's not going to negatively affect their game. But the other thing is also is if I wasn't honest to the integrity of what we agree, then my credibility would go. And if we relate that to a player and a coach, if a coach is saying, guys, I want you to do this, and you know, this is how we need to be as a team, especially pre-season, you have those conversations. But then the coach doesn't honor that themselves. The coach, when they start, they can't regulate their state. They start shouting, saying things that are in a negative impact, disrespectfully to some players, in the very way we wouldn't want a player to talk to another player. And now the players, they may not have the relationship and the environment to go, coach, hang on a minute, you're not doing what you agree, coach. They'll just be thinking it. Now the credibility is gone. So one thing I really want to make clear with this whole process about need-centered is that athlete-centered, need-centered as it should be, is not about standing around and asking questions. It's not about never telling a player, actually, you're wrong, this is why we need to do this. It's the full spectrum of that coaching understanding, but it's really being confident of knowing how to scan and knowing when to do a little one-to-one, knowing when to step in and go, there's a misunderstanding here. I need to make a decision here. Or importantly, no, I'm going to let this go because I've given the players the tools where they can problem solve. And even if they don't get it right, they'll work together to work it out. And it's understanding that sliding scale. And I use the exact same principles with a coach. I'll be in Alan when he's using as an example in a live coaching session. I'll be his shadow. I'll never, if he wants to talk to a player, he just ignores me and talks to a player. But if I'm seeing stuff, I'll just whisper in there, Alan, what are you seeing? What are you seeing over there? What are you seeing here? And then if he's missed something, that can be all it needs. Go there. Okay, so what are you going to do? Right, I need to do a reset. I know 1-to-1 here, and off he goes. Alan uses the same principles with players. So he's got a player on the sideline that might be injured, or another player just come on. Okay, what are you seeing over there, Stevie? Yeah, okay, so what can you do? Can you go on and sort that? Or actually, can you give a timeout? Can you speak to the players? Do you need me for that? Oh, I can do that, coach. Okay, off you go. So it's that light and shade of understanding. That's the competencies of effective coaching, how to influence somebody without telling them. I think that's the skill.
And I think that's, to go back to Lace's question to me earlier, actually, Mark, was, the paradigm shift and seeing the value in these principles and concepts. One of the biggest, one of the things that made me gravitate most to it was the journey I was going to go on as a coach was very similar to the journey the player was going to go on. So you've just talked about it there, how that transition happened. Like when I'm in a practice session and you're following me around and you're in my ear, I'm doing the same thing to the players. Instead of stopping 12 guys, instead of stopping 10 guys playing to talk to one guy, I'm scanning and sniping for what I mean by that is like pulling the guy over, going, what are you thinking? What are you seeing? All right, can you make a change? Can you make a shift? Do you want to do it from the sideline, or do you want to sub in and make it happen live play? You choose. Give them that kind of a choice so they have a bit of freedom. And if they don't know what they're seeing and they're not able to answer, I'll jump in and I'll help them, because that's the sliding scale Mark talked about, from asking to telling, and that's the needs. That's an aspect of the needs part. So that's what really, I have to say, Mark, I think it's one of the most unique aspects of PDS is what you did with me, I did with the players, and I really like that process. Why? Because I felt it. I felt the PDS principles. So now, in order for me to teach it and influence somebody else, was a bit more authentic for me to do it. There was a lot more clarity for me. I feel very confident teaching Mark's principles, Layson. Like I feel really confident with that stuff, because I've been on that journey myself, where Mark has taken me on that journey as a mentor. But Mark, can I go back to something you said a while ago about, you can know the theory of this stuff and you say one thing, but you do another thing, and then you have to be consistent with the players. I mean, you told me a long time ago, and I start every season like this by telling the players honestly and openly, guys, I'm going to wear different hats when I'm coaching you, and here's why. And I spend a long time, let's say, 1-to-1, small groups, full team together, explaining to the players, this is how I'm going to coach you, and here's why, to get them to see the value. Now, Mark will talk very well about how to do that if we need to, but I also tell the players this, Layson, which is for me easy now. It wasn't at the very start, and it was a bit of a paradigm shift, like you said, actually, in this aspect. I will also tell the players that I'm not going to get this right all the time, guys. Like, this is where I'm at as a coach. Like, in a game, I don't want to scream and shout my head off from the sideline, because I don't necessarily believe that helps you as much as if I can facilitate the practices where you're making decisions for yourself live and play. And we give you these tools and concepts and principles that you can pull out and use, the rule of 3, which Mark talked about in your last episode. So, but I will tell them, I'll say, guys, look, because of where I am on the journey, I'm not where I want to be yet. So sometimes I will actually probably get emotional. And, what I need you to do now, because this is a needs-based approach collectively, what I need from you guys is to pull me up in those moments and and stand strong on your own feet. That's for me, it's not about giving them permission. It's about actually, you guys need to understand that I'm on a journey of development also. I don't want to be at the current stage I'm at. I want to be better every week. I want to be better every year, just like you guys want to go to bigger leagues. I want to go to bigger league. And you guys are going to be my facilitators, because the more I get it right with you, the better I'm getting, the better you're getting. So it's very easy I want to say this differently, but I can't think of a phrase. It's very easy to win a player over with the value of this stuff. But I don't think you have to be honest with them about where you're at with it as well, and what it will look like when you coach. What I've done actually, Layson, is showed players videos, like new players, import players that come to us. I will show them videos of my timeouts the previous year. I'll show them videos, little snippets of the practices last year where what it looks like when I'm scanning on the sideline, just so it's not all theory I'm throwing at them. You know, we'll show some video footage where the PDS principles are being brought to life, where players are calling timeouts and they're on a clock of 20 seconds because that's the constraint we put in for that segment. You have a 20-second timeout because it's only one thing they should be talking about. And I'll show them videos of that, so that and it's always the penny drops that way, you know. But yeah, I think, Mark, there's two things there for me I wanted to pick up on what you said. One is wearing the different hats and being honest with the players about that, and being honest about where you are on your journey. And then the other thing I really wanted to get across was the uniqueness of PDS is I go on the same journey as the players with my growth and development, which is pursuing excellence.
Alan, can I add something there to what you just said there? Because I think you said something very poignant there, was that not only is this a paradigm shift for the coaches, but for the players as well, especially if they're in a situation where they've been in a club system where they're used to one model of leadership, one model of coaching. Now they're coming in, let's say, to the national level, and now they're they're working with you, and there's all of a sudden now there's got to be some moments you're like, okay, what is this? Does that resonate?
Absolutely, and the short answer to that, Layson, is the sliding scale. You know, for me as a coach, and this is where you got to do your homework, especially with players that come into the national team. Like, I've got to know their background. I've got to know how they've been coached. I've got to know what makes them tick. What level, how hot does it have to get for them to infiltrate their emotional state? How hot does it have to get? What kind of things make them? It shows me at their worst, shows them at their best. You have to do your homework and your research. Now, based on experience of using the concepts and principles, I will make a calculated decision as to where on that sliding scale we are between me actually transferring ownership or shifting the dial for them to be a bit more independent, or actually I need to step in more. So again, we're back to needs-based approach. It's not one hat fits all 12 guys. You know, if I look at our national team, say go back 3 years ago, let's go with that team. On that roster, there was probably, I would say, at least half were ready for these concepts and principles. Why? Because I had them under 16s 4 years ago and 3 years ago. The new guys that come in, there's always around 4 or 5, maybe not 6 is a lot. And you have to take them through a different process, not a different process, a different stage of the process. So you have to do your homework, Layson. You got to know what makes your players tick, what way they're wired. What do they look like at their best? What do they look like at their worst? What ticks them off? And I know Mark talked about this in your previous episode, but then let's put stuff in place that accelerates them, that brings them up to speed. Not necessarily up to the speed of, let's say, a Jacob Round, which is one player I've had under 16s for 2 years, under 18s for 2 years. I may not bring a new player who comes into the under 18s and expect them to be at Jacob Round's level with being an effective decision maker, with self-managing, with being poised, having poise under pressure, taking ownership, taking leadership. I'm not going to have an expectation on a new player coming in to be at his level by the end of this, because he's on his own journey, and we're measuring success by the steps they take in their path, on their runway, on their journey. So again, we'll mold it in different ways, and it goes back to what I said there a moment ago. Mark said something to you the last time he was on this about you sometimes will set things up in a practice to enhance what that player needs to develop. So it might be covertly trying to rattle their emotions. So they get a hard foul in practice. I'm not calling it. I want that player to play through it, because with the homework I've done, I know that he needs to be stronger with his trigger of his emotions. So I'm going to build that into a practice session. Now, the other player who gets fouled, I'll call it, because he doesn't need me to do that. So now, but you have to be careful with that, because you have to be ready to manage it. That takes experience. I've got that wrong in the past. I get it right. I'm getting it right a lot more now. So yeah, you're absolutely right, Layson. And you just have to have your homework done and be ready to coach them, not differently, but at different stages.
And I'm going to dissect that a bit there, Alan, because there's some key points in there. So first thing is understanding that person behaviors, and this is what we're talking about now. Remember, my whole philosophy is performance is a behavior, not an outcome. We have to look at person behaviors in the same way we look at person technical ability, person's tactical game management competency. So we understand when people come in, they're going to be at different levels in their personal skills of managing themselves, how to interact with others, how to accept feedback from others, and how to deal with different pressures. The other thing we got to remember is that we can't take for granted what a coach we speak to in the past before we see these players are accurate. Because if they're a traditional coach, I've had examples even at the highest level, international pro teams, where the coaches, where they've come from clubs saying, this guy's not very bright, Mark, or this guy's lazy, this guy doesn't make very good decisions. You put them in the right environment and all of a sudden these players that were not all of a sudden shine. So we've got to be mindful of, a lot of the time players that we're seeing are a product of their own environment. Their environment may not be the best environment to get the best out of them. They may just start sitting back and going, I'm bored now, I'm disengaged. Coach always tells me what to do, I'll just cruise. So that's an understanding as well. Sometimes you need to establish your own baseline. Now, Alan's mentioned the way we do with the whiteboards, get them to play, force them to make decisions, step back, put the interventions in. The other thing I'd say with that is it's critical, and coaches don't do this well enough. I'm generalizing here. We have to spend time with them before we start to let them know the value of why we're going to coach this way, linked into how do we want to play? What's the dream way we want to play? Describe that to me. Not just the score lines. Describe the type team we want to be. What does it look like? What does it sound like? Okay, as a coach, what would that look like to me as a coach? On and off the court in timeouts, if we're in basketball, pre-game, halftime, what if we're 50 down, what if we're 50 up, what if one of you is underperforming? All these things, what does that look like to me? And then once we agree what that is, we go, okay, if that's who we want to be, what does practice need to look like? How different does practice need to look like than you've been used to? And now we start get them to tell us, and it's very easy. I mean, Alan's skilled at it now. Obviously, you're a novice. This is more difficult, but there's some tools that you can use just to help them understand. Oh, okay, so practice coach, you can't continue to tell me what to do and give me the answers and the solutions all the time. You need to help me think and work it out for myself. These kind of things. All of a sudden, okay, so then we can go into practice. Can you show me what that would look like? And all of a sudden, we're starting a dialogue that's very different. I'd say as well is that depending on the skill of a coach in these principles, if you start with 5-year-olds, which I have, they'll be all over it. They will love it because I've had no previous negative experiences about expectations of a practice environment or a game. As you go up for the ages, the effort you put in at the very beginning, get them to see the value and to start living it in every single practice session, not dipping in and out because things aren't going well as a coach. You literally living it will get the players to buy into it more. A great example was when I was mentoring Mike Ford, who's a British Lions rugby coach, England coach. He was with the England rugby team at the time as a coach. He wasn't the head coach. He was the backs defense coach. So I started to mentor Mike. We put in these principles on. We had some of the best players in the world in practice standing, looking at Mike and said, Mike, just tell me what you want me to do. Why? Because that's what they're used to in the clubs. But if we want to be best in the world, we can't have players waiting for the coach to tell them what to do. We want to go, I understand the game well enough and I have the confidence to know if I see this, this is what we're going to go for. And we've developed practice that well that I've got to know my players around me. So they read what I read. I can say this to Danny or Stevie or to Sarah, to Julie, and I know they know what that means and that's going to get the best out of them. And not just play phases without realizing I need to get these 5 on a court if it's basketball because they need to work each other out. I'm going to put situations and problems in. I'm going to give them tools to work it out, but I'm not going to give them the answers. So that's that light and shade Alan spoke about, that you may have someone that technically, tactically is very advanced, but actually in their people competency of scanning, self-awareness of the state, managing it, how to make a decision live, they may be really novice at it. So then Alan, as a coach, would doing a little few more one-to-ones with that person. Another player that runs with it may not be as skilled tactically or technically. I can let them run with it. I can give some leadership within that because they're good at the behavior stuff of reading the game. And all of a sudden then you're like the difference between a cook and a chef. As a chef, your interventions are individual based on their needs, the same as you should do to technical development. But actually you're all doing it to the same cause, which is the dream, the lighthouse, how we want to build. The challenge is if we dip in and out as a coach or we can't manage our own state and we don't have interventions to manage it, we'll lose credibility straight away because the players will just sit there and go, oh, this is a new thing. Has coach just been on a course or listened to a podcast? Yeah, we'll see how he goes with it. I'm sure 2 weeks he'll be back to old coach. So you've got to live it for them to go, well, this is real. He's going for this now, to get them to accept that this is a long-term change. It's not going to go away. And then you start to see the magic happen. But if you dip in and out, the players will regress the same as the coach will regress. Hence why I'm relentless with the coach when we pre-agree things, because the biggest difficulty in human nature is to shift human behavior. So under pressure, you have a new behavior. That's as difficult for a coach as it is for a player. That's why in basketball in particular, American football is very common. You may see a coach in practice that's very well mannered, good scanning, good at interventions. You watch the same coach in the game, they're like a Tasmanian devil with no management of their own, even no awareness or no management of their state, being negative, a negative influence to their team, not reading the game well enough, and they look like totally different people. So that's them not having a mentor to get them to recognize, do you recognize you're different? What interventions have you got in place to help you be the best person you can to get the best out of your players? And that's just one example of that awareness we need to build within coaches, and how consistent a mentor needs to be, but a coach needs to be to influence the players, the same as a mentor needs to be to influence the coach.
So one of the things that I wrote down in this, as I was starting to kind of research this, is that when you hear need-centered, that there could be a possible misconception that this does not have an element of accountability of, how do you deal with the players when they do not, when you have to have conversations, let's say in the basketball world of, shot selection, or you're not performing to a certain level. Is that a true misconception? And then how do you address that? Mark or Alan?
Yeah, so in essence, need-centered is all about what the player needs linked into the lighthouse. So if we're developing a team that needs to be able to self-manage themselves, adapt live on the court based on what they see, based on adapting to the opposition, not waiting for the coach to feed them information, then we need a player that is confident in game management, is confident in scanning well and reading the game, and then committing to a decision based on what they see. And importantly, self-evaluating it without rubbernecking, as I call it, looking over the coach to go, is that okay, coach? So one of the things I always teach any coach and the players is a self-evaluation process. So it's taken from basic experiential learning that's been in mountaineering and education for years, maybe not used effectively, but it's been there. And it's a basic principle of, based on what you see, you make a choice, you commit to the choice 100%, then you review what happened, what were the differences between what you wanted to happen and what did, and would you change anything? So a simple would be is, okay, so once we do this, our questioning framework changes as a coach. So the first thing we need to do, instead of telling them that was great, or no, we need to do this, or what was wrong with that, what we're saying is, okay, review that. So no clues. It could be great, or it could be unacceptable. The problem is, traditionally, the coach is only time when a coach asks a question, a player's done something wrong. So the player's just thinking, well, coach has answered me a question. I must have done something wrong. Where was I 5 seconds ago? I was in transition. Right. What are the common problems of transition? Oh, it's that. Coach, it was this. And the coach then goes, great, he knows. So then the coach is happy. But actually, it's a learned answer. So what we need to do is go the opposite of just, and Alan does this very well now, is if they're running back even on the court in practice, we don't pull them over. We just go, Stevie, and we just shout Stevie's name. When Stevie is running back because he's already self-reviewed, Stevie will just shout the answer or give a thumb up or go, should have been wide, or yet nailed that, good pass on. So then the coach just thumbs up. They don't even have to take them out of play. Now, if he's saying something where he isn't sure, coach can then pull them out on a one-to-one, literally for 20 seconds. Talk to me about what happened over there. What were your options? What did you see? And this is questions that get to the point quick, because we've taught them how to self-review. They're not waiting for us to ask them questions before they have to think about it. They're already thinking about it. They've already concluded. What we're doing, though, instead of getting them to just give us the answer, we're asking them, okay, what did you see? What were the options? There's 2 reasons for that. Is they may have seen something you didn't, because they're from a different place. And also, we can't then put an intervention in based on their decision if we don't yet first know, did they see the other options? So for us saying, why did you make that decision? We're missing the trick there. What we need to be saying is, what did you see? Because now we can recognize actually the source of the problem. They didn't see that option. That's why they didn't go for it. Now, if they saw the option, then we can go, okay, so what were your reason for choosing this one? I'm interested. So then it could be falling on, we now recognize as a coach, actually under pressure, that's their go-to, because they don't feel as confident in the other options. In practice with no pressure, they can do it, but under pressure, they revert back to the same. So then coach can put an intervention in, or actually maybe he thinks, I don't trust the players on the court. If I made that choice, I don't trust the other players can make that or to receive that pass or be running up quick enough. So now we go, okay, what interventions can we put in place either to build your confidence or to establish that is true? So can you see these subtleties of, one, we got to teach them the self-review, basic experiential learning, there's many, but we want to separate tactic, the choice from the execution. We can't just put it on an outcome, because actually it may have been they executed it fantastically, it was the wrong choice. It may be it was the right choice, but they didn't commit, so it was a commitment issue. It may be it was the right choice, they committed 100%, but technically they didn't quite make it. We can work on that. Or actually they made the right choice, they executed it, they nailed it, it just didn't come off. But you wouldn't change anything, because not everything comes off all the time, as we know in basketball, in any sport. So it's getting that dialogue going to get them to not look at the outcome and setback, to know in the moment the choice they made, backing themselves commit to a choice, and understanding coach is interested in why you made the choices and what you saw. Coach is not having a go at you. Coach is interested in why and your understanding of the choices you made and what you saw. That dialogue changes the whole dynamics of the team. And then players, instead of looking down and thinking, I'll just wait for coach to give me the answer and go, just look and nod at coach. Now they know coach's expectation of me is he's interested or she's interested in what I'm seeing in the choices I made him while managing my state, while coach is managing there. They're generally interested. Then they're supporting me if I'm wrong, challenging me if I'm wrong, or making sure I recognize when I was right. So can you see, actually need-centered is beginning with the end in mind, as Stephen Covey says. I need to get them self-managing, self-thinking. So let's teach them how to self-review. Let's set up frameworks in practice. It's a new skill, so they can self-review. Let's use them on the sideline to scan others and review. Let's get them off, let's get them on. Let's use the hot reviews, as we call them, the one-to-ones. So we don't have to keep stopping play and bring them as a group to have chats with most of them disengaged, just listening to me talking. Back to the principle of player first, player last. I want to hear from them. They know my expectation now. I'm interested in why they made the decision they had, what they saw, etc. What would they change, if anything? I want it from them. And then if they've given me the answers, I don't need to add anything as a coach. Why am I talking? Show me, push them back out. So many coaches think they still need to say something at the end. If you're talking, they've already given the answers. All you're doing is disengaging the players. That's not our purpose. Our purpose is to make ourselves redundant. So if the players are doing it without you, you're being good as a coach. Why stop play or why start talking? So can you see the subtle differences between need-centered in that area?
Oh yes, I definitely could see that, and I think that's for some coaches. That's kind of what you just said first, teaching that self-review process. I think it's one thing that you commit to this. You commit to this. Oh, okay, I want to do this with my team, but we have to put those first steps in place. So, yeah. Alan, with that in mind, talk a little bit about, as you started to put those pieces in place, what were some challenges that you faced, both with your players and maybe within your own staff and yourself, in terms of being able to put these into place?
So no doubt there's challenges that come with it, but the challenges change as time goes on, and I think if I go in the order of how they appeared for me, I think, and it ties in with what Mark was just speaking about there, in terms of answering your question, Layson. I think one of the hardest things you have to be when you're trying to modify how you coach or add competencies to what you've already done, because we're not doing a complete overhaul, Mark, are we? And I think we should be clear on that. Like I'm Alan Keane when I coach. I've been Alan Keane for 41 years, and Mark's been mentoring me for coming up on 10, and I'm still Alan Keane. I'm not Mark Bennett when I coach, and the thing is, like, the hardest part is you must be patient. For me, that's the hardest bit. Being patient and being consistent. Like Mark talked about it there. When you introduce a new principle or a new element into your coaching practice, such as, you're prophesizing to the players on the value of them staying emotionally balanced and developing and telling them that we're going to work on developing their decision making under pressure when it matters most, when the game is live in action. and you're facilitating your practices for that. You have to be consistent with that, and that takes time. Like, I think there's a great example. AJ Carr is a fantastic example. We brought him in as an import player from America last year. He played last season with us, and this was all new to him. Like, he told me flat out, we had a great relationship. We had a great relationship because he was just very honest. But he told me flat out that, he was struggling with this process. It wasn't, he felt early on this wasn't for him. It wasn't what he was used to. He wasn't used to having coaches, ask him, what does he think? What does he see? What does he feel? And, we brought him back this year, and he was so much better. As Mark, you would have seen that. Like, he really carried these principles forward for me. With a new team, a brand new team this year, AJ is the only returning player. He really brought the PDS principles that we put in place the year before. He really brought them to life. So patience and consistency, I think, is one of the biggest challenges you have. And Mark, you're absolutely right. If you're not consistent with it, it can backfire because you lose the faith and the confidence of the players. But also understanding that a new system for players takes time. But the second to last thing I'll talk about in regards to it is, and Mark, you were very good with me at establishing this way of thinking. It's incredibly important that we as coaches identify the steps the player has taken, not necessarily where they're at, but the journey they've gone on. So, for example, I had one player this year that was very emotional, like incredibly emotional, responding to every referee's call, responding to everything that didn't go his way on the game, in a practice, in game, responding to everything because it was raining outside, responding to anything. And, by the end of the season, he didn't go full circle and do a 180-degree flip and not complain about anything. He was still complaining about referees. But by the end of the year, it was a lot less than it was at the start of the year. And he showed good growth. And one of the things that you highlighted to me, Mark, years ago was, measure success on their growth and the steps they've taken, not with where they're at, because, they're all on different journeys and they're all go at different speeds. And I think that's one other thing as well. We as coaches, to keep the faith and believe in these concepts and principles, understand it takes time, understand that they're coming in at different levels with different filters, different pre-programming, different wiring from previous experiences. Understand that you are going to have to be patient and consistent as a coach to bring it to life and see the benefits of it. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can recognize some things really, really quickly, actually, like really quickly. And Mark, I won't go into the story, but the timeout story when you were with me in the Holland game, that was like an immediate impact. Like, we saw that in one day. We saw a shift. We saw major progress with some really introverted players in the space of one practice, one game. It was really incredible. But for it to have really sustained change, let's say, it does take a lot longer. It takes a good portion of your season. And AJ was a great example of that when he came back the second year.
I'd say, though, Alan, if you're looking at AJ there as an example, that's a player that's gone for an American system, literally being told what to do. And he admitted himself he had learnt answers. He knew exactly what the coach was going to ask him before he asked him. So he just told the coach what he wanted to hear, even if he disagreed with it, because he just didn't want the hassle. So, again, if players are in that environment, we're definitely not getting the best out of them. But I'd say even AJ, even within 4 weeks, he was an improved player. You could see the change in him. So he wasn't where we want him to be. So it's that key thing about, let's assess behaviors. Let's base mark everyone on where they are. Let's develop an environment to see where the reality is. And then what we're looking for is, are we seeing positive shifts? If we are, let's not be satisfied with that, but let's recognize and positive reinforcement there is change. But we still want to keep moving them and stretching them, but we can't be critical of going, yeah, but you're not there yet. We need to recognize, actually, this player never taught. Now they're talking 2 sessions. In 2 sessions, they're talking twice in group sessions. They never taught before. That's progress right there. But I still want them to talk every session. So it's that understanding and that self-recognition. And that's back to the scanning as a coach and really being sharp on understanding your individuals as people and players, understanding you're not letting them off the hook. But once you agree stuff, you're going to be relentless with them, but you're also going to be patient based on the principle of, we are where we are, we're ready when we're ready. It's the same principle I use with coaches. I've got a toolkit that is ridiculously huge now, because I've been living this for 30 years. But I won't give Alan or anyone else the full kit. I won't give them the big book. They'll get the first page, and sometimes they get the first paragraph from the first page. Then when they're ready, they get a little bit more. And early on, coaches go, well, Mark, what is it? Give me more. And it's that patience, the same as we want with the coach, with players going, well, let's work on this. Let's nail this under pressure. Let's get it right now. You're ready for the next bit. Let's discuss this. Right now, we're ready for the next bit. It's not a case of just giving people information. And this is the challenge with YouTube now, with the shutdown of the world. How many more of these are going on, which is fantastic. But the reality is, let's have a great example, Layson, now is scanning. I've heard on social media so much more the word scanning than I've ever heard before. Now, I know it's something Alan knows that I've been talking about for many years. But now everyone's agreeing scanning is really important for players in an adaptive team. Well, here's a funny thing. People have been recognizing effective communication is a critical part of an effective team for decades. But there's many teams out there are still ineffective in communication. So it's not the fact of recognizing it needs to be better, it's important. It's the fact of, are you effective as a coach to put in interventions effectively and long enough to change the behaviors, so therefore unacceptable communication becomes effective consistently under pressure? And that's the craft as a coach. So we can pick up loads of ideas and concepts from all the media, speaking to people over coffee, that's great, yeah, I'll take that away. But unless we understand our own baseline, unless we understand the need of me and the players of where we are, and if I could only pick one thing that would have the biggest impact, what would it be? Well, I'm going to understand that. I'm going to understand how the intervention works. I'm going to be patient with it. I'm going to be ready when I'm ready, and I'm not going to move on to the next one until I've embedded that. But I'm effectively reviewing it. Was it worth it? As opposed to chucking 20 things in because I've seen a great NBA team have just done this play. Let me chuck it into practice next week. That's not need-centered. That is doing an injustice to the players in their own growth. And that's we need to be mindful of when we're going through this journey of need-centered coaching. We're ready when we're ready. We are when we are. And that's sometimes when someone external mentoring you allows you to go, well, actually, let's establish what number one is need first. Once we've established a baseline, okay, how are you going to integrate that? How do we know when it's integrated well enough before we can move on to the next element? And that's the critical element for success in coach development and player development, in my opinion.
Those are excellent points. So I've got some questions here from our audience that I'd like to go ahead and present and have you and talk about these. First question is, I've heard Mark talk about implementing these principles at a very young age, which gives them the habits early. How do I, as a coach who is new to this principle, get it across to older players?
Yeah, so it's back to the point of spending time at the beginning. When are you going to intervene this to get them to see the value in it, linked into the light task? How do we want to play? What type of team we want to be? So they can tell you what that is, and then say, okay, so where are we now? Even use game footage if you want of where you are within that team. Okay, so what's the differences? Okay, so if we need to change these things and we put them in that order of value that we need to work on to be the team we've all agreed now that we want to be, what do we need to do in practice differently to develop the very tools and skills that we've said we want, that we've now recognized we haven't got? So it's definitely a dialogue conversation of meaning and understanding. Back to then, okay, so we've recognized, so let's use a great example of players accepting feedback from other players. Question to you, Layson, how important do you say would that be in basketball in a game of players accepting feedback from other players under pressure? How important would you say that was?
I would say it's very important.
Critical, right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, how many teams and coaches listening to this would recognize that they have players that are very, very bad at accepting feedback from other players? Most teams, right?
Exactly.
So the first question is, if that's one of your critical elements, what conscious interventions have you put in place in practice, often enough, consistently enough, where the players know and see the value of it to have an impact, to change that behavior that gives you the turn in the game? Every coach I've ever asked, they've said, Mark, I haven't. So here's the point of this, is recognizing that players are smart in common sense. Their practitioners are often not academics. That's why they're playing basketball and other sports. But let's have a dialogue with them so they see the value in changing based on the team we want to be. recognize the specifics, not the generalization, and then agree on the 1 or 2 things that will give us our biggest return, and then agree, what do we need to change in practice as players? What do you guys need to change? What do I need to change as a coach to bring this alive? And how relentless do we need to be? Agree what that looks like. So we use the UAEs, acceptable, unacceptable, exceptional. Agree when you're going to step in, when you're not. So I've got like the rule of 3, resets, many tools. They agree it, and then you go, right, whatever we agree, we're going to live, and we're going to bring it alive in this session. And then we don't allow ourselves to regress back. We go, look, we're on a journey. We're not going to be every time, but what our expectation is, we commit in the moment to what we agree. And if we forget about it, because we will, because that's natural, we're here to back each other and remind each other what we agreed. And we have to accept the feedback when we hear somebody recognizing that we forgot about it. And we recognize, we use the 3 A's. So it's the basics of acknowledgement, acceptance, and action. So the first thing out of those 3 is the acceptance internally that you may not see. The acknowledgement is a hand touch close or a thumb up if it's a distance. The action is then I do something about it. So now there's a recognized framework where we've had a conversation. I've done this with senior pro teams all around the world, and they really get it. The key is then is when you agree, okay, but what's that going to look like in practice? What's that going to look like in this next session from me and you? Then you agree that, then you have to do it. And where people trip up is often the conversation's a bit one way. They don't get into detail. Then the players don't really see the value. And then if you do, the key trip up is we don't then know what it looks like in a practice session, what the differences coach and players need to do, and then we have to do it and hold each other accountable back to only review what we said the success was. So if success is we're going to be dynamic and accept feedback from our teammates, if you're saying, okay, that's the one thing we're going to work on, for example, our success criteria when we're reviewing the groups is that it's not the tactics of the game. We're going to play 5-on-5. Okay, let's see how we go under pressure. Okay, review, how do we do? Yeah, Stevie, I spoke to you. Yeah, I saw the hand. Jimmy, you didn't give me a hand touch there. Or I recognize, actually, I didn't follow through on it. I agree, but I didn't action. Okay, so what do we need to change? Great, you recognize it, off you go again. So remember, everything that we're talking about, I'm sure every coach will recognize it's important, but we need to look at it the same as we're looking at a tactical and tactical element of a game. It's not going to happen by us speaking about it. It's going to happen by us embedding it through action and evaluation of action and commitment to action, often enough, consistently enough, under enough pressure, so it comes alive in a game. And this is the principle that you can do at any age, but it's easier when you start earlier. But you can change any team so long as you go through that process.
Next question. If or what reflective system or cycle do you use?
Yeah, so I think I've answered that one in that basics of the experiential learning cycle. There's many. It's just the fact of getting players to scan effectively. If I go through the cycle, I mentioned it on the last delivery I did with you. It's the basics of, this is where it all stems from. Players aware of their own state. Players then managing their state. If they can't self-manage, they use a rule of 3, reaching out to other players, going, I need you here, I'm starting to lose it. Player comes in touch. Or they are not self-aware, player comes in, come on, you got this, reset in the moment now, show me the next, what's next, whatever it might be that presses their button. Now they're in the right state, scanning. I'm looking around, what are the opportunities and threats consistently? Based on that data, I then make a choice. Based on my understanding of the game and my ability in the moment, I then commit to a choice. Once I've committed to the choice, that's the execution. I simply, live in a moment, review the choice and the execution. Did I commit? Yes or no? If it's a no, well, I'm just going to commit next. You don't go any further. If I've committed, was it the right choice? Was it the right execution? Yes or no, 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 yes. Right, next time I'm going to do this. And that's it. It's a very simple cycle. I've got some videos up through my website, and you'll see kids of 8, 9 doing this live in soccer, in rugby, very, very fast. You'll see the hands up. You'll see a coach coming out with a hot review with a player. The player will go in intricate detail straight away without the coach having to ask a ton of questions. That's telling you as a coach that they're using this self-reviewing process and cycle. And it becomes almost armor for players at any age, where now instead of them thinking, I don't know what to do, or I'm just focused on the outcome, now I'm in a negative spiral, they've evaluated, they've concluded, they're back in the present, they're moving on. It's a very simple way to give them confidence in what they've just done and what they're going to do next to keep them in the present.
Alan, next two questions are for you. The first one is, has PDS made coaching more enjoyable and enduring? I'm assuming your mindset before PDS was winning at all costs and your specific role in generating the team's success. Since PDS, I'm assuming you're driven by each player's individual development and forming individual relationships with each player, which facilitates their development and their overall team development.
Okay, I've got the question in front of me as well, Layson. So there's a couple inside there. Has it made coaching more enjoyable? Absolutely. You know, I'm less emotional, which means I'm less frustrated and I'm less angry. You know, I don't coach. I would say I probably didn't coach angry at all this year at any point in time. And you know, Matt Johnson once said to me, which I thought was a great question: is there a place for anger in sport? Because we see a lot of it. You know, we see a lot of it, but I drive home from a practice if I've had a good session, and my definition of a good session is actually bringing all these principles to life consistently for the full practice. When I've had a good session, I drive home with energy. I drive home feeling upbeat. I drive home with positive feelings. So it's definitely made coaching for me more enjoyable, no question. It also has freed me from feelings of guilt, to be honest, because in the moments where I do become emotional and I lay into a player, and I go into that kind of domain where I'm emotionally imbalanced and shouting at players, and I often have feelings of I went there again and I'm frustrated, and that it frustrates me when I go there because I see it now this is not for everyone. I see it for me as a weakness when I go there because I know better. It's like asking a player, well, you had choices, you chose this one. Yeah, it wasn't the right choice. Did you know it wasn't the right choice? Yeah, I did know. Well, that's not smart, is it? And I know now the difference between effective coaching and ineffective coaching. And when I'm in an emotional state, I coach ineffectively. That's reality. And I have plenty of evidence to prove it, be it in practice or be it in game. So I drive home from practice every night when I felt like I've coached effectively, and coaching effectively for me is helping the players to self-manage, helping the players to be self-sufficient live during play. And Mark has talked a lot about how those concepts. The other part of the question was, assuming your mindset before PDS was winning at all costs, I still want to win. Let's make no mistake about it. We're not turning up any weekend. We're not turning up in the summer to lose any game. I'm never thinking lose. But Mark sent me a message one day this season. It was early in the season. And he said, it was very refreshing to watch your interview this evening. We'd lost the game by 15 points. We'd lost the derby. And he said, when you were talking in the interview, he said, I couldn't tell if you'd won or lost. And that for me was a great message of, yeah, I nailed, we lost the game, but I coached well. And, I don't get hung up on the losses like I used to. I'm able to manage them better, manage how they land with me. But I want to win. We all want to win. And I'm coaching players this way to help them perform better, to help them become the best version of themselves, which ultimately means we become a better team. Now, if we win more games because of it, great. But you're asking the question about long-term over short-term. For me, this is a long-term process. I'm committing to this for the bigger picture, not for the win on Saturday, not for the win on Sunday. But I fully believe, because I've seen the benefit of it, that winning comes with it. But the reality of defining yourself on a win and a loss is, we've all been in a game where the other team is better than you. They have better players than you have. That's reality. But can we get the best out of our players in that moment is my definition of success. And the wins take care of themselves. You'll hear Bill Walsh, The Score Takes Care of Itself, is a great book, in American football many years ago. But I believe in that. I believe the score will take care of itself. And my focus and my definition of success is doing the best we can in the present moment. I think there was a third part to the question. I'm assuming you're driven by each individual player's development. Absolutely. And they're all different. They've all got different success criteria for their individual journey, for sure. Forming individual relationships with each player. Absolutely. But the forming individual relationships is incredibly important. And I've spoke about this before. I think you have to have a clear relationship with yourself before you can have an effective relationship with your team. And that goes back to raising your own self-awareness, you know, and how do you do that? Mark's talked loads about that, so I won't repeat it. But I hope that answers your question.
Okay, let's go ahead and Alan or Mark, I don't know if you both can see the next set of questions here. First one was, every player has individual needs that might be unique to them. How do you influence everyone's needs within each session, or are they addressed session by session?
Well, that's a very simple one. Everyone agrees the lighthouse, which is what type team we want to be. Remember what we're developing in team dynamics. We're developing an interdependent team, not a dependent team, not an independent team, an interdependent team. What we mean by that is everyone understanding each other, everyone doing the best they can, being the best they can be, and helping each other be the best they can be. Now, when you develop that as a dynamics, coach in team is part of that. Them being the best they can be and help each other be the best they can be, and the players helping coach be the best they can be. Alan's got some examples of players challenging him effectively when he was unacceptable based on pre-agreed. What we also do is we agree with every player that what we call individual work on individual focus areas, whatever language you want to use. And that is consistently ongoing. So that doesn't change every single session. They're ready when they're ready. So it's the number one thing. So it may be managing their state awareness, accepting feedback, scanning, committing to things, whatever it might be, that's the same for them. That's what it is. So then all we do is, Alan's really good at this again now. Other coaches I mentor are really good. Even pre the warm up, coaches now wandering around, just in that social, developing that rapport, maintain the rapport. And one of the questions the coach asks, because there'll be a list, it'll be audited, remind me on your work on a day. So what would that look like? So do you need any help from the other players or from me within that? So it keeps it in the front of their heads. They're sharing with you. That's not the coach reminding them, that's getting it from the players. And then on the hot reviews during the game, when they're just doing those little one-to-ones on the sideline, one of the things coach always asks them is, okay, just review, how's your work on coming on? And now the players, oh yeah, is that okay? Can you show me that now? How long? So it may be, I'll give you an example of a swimmer. A swimmer may be that they need to maintain a certain stroke. And the coach has now come to me, and I had this with one of the national triathlete coaches, and they're saying, Mark, they can't do it for a length, and I'm getting really frustrated. So very simple answer. We bring the player in. What is your work on? Right, I need to maintain that focus and concentration, my breathing, the stroke length, but I can't do a length. So my first question is okay, how long can you do? If you commit 100%, how long? So I can do 75%. Okay, let's agree, commit to 75%, then cruise the last quarter. And then all we do is review that. So when they come in, how did you do? Yeah, committed. I got 80%, coach. Brilliant. That's what I saw too. So it's understanding that individual focus is still them individually, but it's the vision is an interdependent division, and that work on is kept alive. So when it's developed, there may be a new one. It may be on it for 2 weeks. It may be on it for the whole season. That's individual to the players, but it's the coach's responsibility and the individual players. And also they share it with the other players, responsibility to support each other to be the best they can be and help everyone else be the best they can be. And I hope that answers the question of where that sits.
I'm just going to add to that a little bit, Mark. What you touched off, and I'll add to it because I've had the experience of it. Like the year before last, we had somebody, one of our very influential, more senior players. He was working a full-time job, and he would come to practice in the evening with us, having, raising a young baby at home, new father for the first time, and working a long day teaching. And, he would come to practice. He was the only non-full-time guy we had. And he would come to me, carrying a lower back injury as well throughout the season. And, I talked to him before practice, like, how are you feeling? And he'd say, I feel a bit rough. I've had a tough week. It's been very busy in school today. And I'd look, how are you feeling? And what can you give? He said, I'm good. I can go. I said, well, if you've got 75% energy in you, can you give me 100 of that 75%? And that's what we're going to deem as acceptable for you tonight. And it was me then having an understanding of where he's at, like meet him where he's at, and not be unrealistic with the expectations just because the full-time guys were able to commit 100% to their 100%. He only had 70% to give. He didn't have a full tank to give because of how his day went. And the second thing I would add to that is, I put it in the past 2 seasons at the end of my session plan, which is a lot shorter now than it used to be. At the end, the second half of it, really, the second half of that sheet of paper has got a list of the players' names. and it's got beside it what their individual success criteria is for this period of time. So, for example, we had 2 Spanish players this year, and communication was obviously a big part of our practice, effective communication. There was a bit of a language barrier with these guys. The pronunciation of words, it wasn't clear. They didn't understand some terminology as well, let's say. So there was 2 things. There was a pronunciation of words, but there was also terminology that they didn't understand, certain words. And I'd put that on the session plan. So Pau and Matthias, I would just put beside it language, terminology, and I'd always be checking in with them as the practice is going on. Pau, talk to me, like we set it up beforehand. If there's anything you don't know, he just needs to look at me and give me a nod, like I don't get it, like talk to me. So I would, instead of stopping the practice going over, I would just run past them real quick, right, bang, this is what we mean by hedge, different things. And then another example would be a couple of other players who were maybe not very emotionally balanced, and like I described already, was easy to upset them. We put in there, I had to remind myself, like 15 guys in practice, like I wanted to know what each individual success criteria was. And I would just scan over that before I go into practice, or, on a water break or whatever, walking over, I would have a quick look at it, right? Remind me what Danny's success criteria is, what AJ is, what's Liam's. And it would just help me to help them. But this was all set up beforehand, like Mark said. It was pre-agreed stuff. It was stuff that they were aware of. It wasn't stuff that I come up with because I feel it's this. It was stuff that it was a discussion that was had. Like Liam would tell me, I want to improve my emotions. I don't want to be moaning at referees. I want to be calmer on the court. Can you help me with this? Yes, I can. Here's one way how. I'm going to remind myself every practice what I need to help you with, as well as a session plan.
Okay, last question is, Mark, on your website, you do have a number of resources available for coaches. If a coach wants to begin this journey, which resource do you recommend they start with first? And what would be maybe the progression, or like you said, give them the first page. What's the first page to start with?
Yeah, there's podcasts on there, and I'd say just work through some of them. Just listen driving in your car, just be self-reflective. If you got to a point now, or even in these conversations, or some of you listened before, and you think, yeah, this is something I need to get better at, it's something I want to find out more about, there's elements I know I can grow as a coach, then just go for the online support. There's a page there. Alan does this with me as well, independently. And there's different levels. So there's one where it's literally just a Skype. You don't need any video. And we'll go through and discuss one-to-one with you where you are. I'd say definitely, if you can, film yourself, put a camera on your chest. Definitely the best place. And just run some practice sessions and just watch it back. Listen, not to the tech tac, but listen to what you're saying. Watch the face and the eye contact with the players, and how you're interacting, how you're listening to them, how's the dialogue, etc. Who's engaged, who's not. Just to establish, are you doing what you think you're doing? And then obviously there's different levels of the online support, whereas actually you send video footage. We work through that, Alan and I, then we get Skype for you and we take you on a journey over 3 months. Very bespoke, very designed for your needs. Irrelevant to the sport, level you're at, the age you're at, where you are, it's specific to you within identifying your needs. So I'd say that, and there's plenty of videos, examples of me delivering, Alan delivering, sort of live practice, etc. But you'll get to a point, however many podcasts you listen to, you're going to get to the point you go, well, yeah, but how do I implement it? Where's my need? Where am I? Where's my baseline? And that's where the online support with me and Alan really comes in, because like we've discussed, you can listen to 100 podcasts and things and it all sounds great, but you got to bring it alive. So it's understanding what's step 1, what's step 2, what's step 3, when am I ready to move on to 2 or 3? And that's where we help.
I know this session has been very valuable to me, because I think there were some nuggets that I picked up, and obviously being able to listen to Alan's journey with this, that some things that I hadn't even thought of or considered, that both you and Alan both brought out. So any final thoughts here as we before we close the session?
Well, yeah, I'll throw a question at you first, Layson, is what are your nuggets? What's your top 2?
I think my top 2 is what Alan mentioned, the importance of understanding that your journey as a coach is very similar to the players. And I think sometimes we get lost in that, and we just think for some coaches, I know for me at times, it's just about me, just myself. And I really don't take the player's perspective. And so again, that's a challenge that I have to work with, and an awareness I have to keep in mind. I think the second thing is what you talked about. it's one thing to want to commit to doing something along these lines of putting together a need-centered approach, but you have to have the proper steps in order. And I think, as you mentioned, that first one is being able to teach everyone how to self-review. And I think that's probably the step maybe that in the past maybe I missed. And so I think that that's probably the foundational thing for me moving forward with my team, is helping not just myself, but each of my players understand this is critical in order for us to progress. But also something else that Alan said, that we're all in this journey as well. And that at times I'm going to drop the ball, and I need you to help me recognize that and help me raise my awareness, because I really like the principle that John Boyd, the famous military strategist, once talked about, that, when you're within a system, it's hard for you to observe the blind spots, and that you do need an outside perspective. You need someone to give you, an analysis of what they're seeing. And it either comes from your coaching staff or your players, and be willing to accept that information. Does that resonate?
Yeah, definitely. And it's one of these things that there's a lot of surface level stuff going on out now about athlete-centered coaching, or putting the person first and the player, and getting self-thinking players. It's the how-to's important, and also understanding that coaches are humans. So supporting them through their change, and giving them the tools to what's step one, step two, and someone being there to put your arm around your shoulder, but importantly, the accountability to give you a kick up the butt when you need it, and not be scared to challenge you on stuff that you said you were going to do. And let's discuss that, is what's lacking. So my whole statement's been for many years is the best athlete development is coach development. I just don't think we're spending enough time as organizations, pro teams, in recognizing that if I'm investing in and selecting all these athletes, it's the coach that can be the greatest influencer. So the sharper the coach gets at influencing the players above and beyond the tech, there's tons of technical and tactical out there. It's how to influence the human being that will get the best out of your players. So if you want to win, even in the short term, be a better influencer. And that's by investing in yourself as a coach. Even if it's not about winning, if it's about actually impacting on players now so they stay in the game longer because they're more engaged, they enjoy it more, they're not going to drop out. It's going to help them in school, how to manage their state, how to communicate with their parents, whatever level, then you're making a difference, not sounding soppy, but you are having an impact on someone that will ripple through the rest of their lives. And we know most players don't make it, in basketball don't make it into NBA. So we shouldn't be thinking, well, it's a short term to win this game. We should be thinking is, what am I doing that make that player a better player that they can take in the next 5 seasons, 10 seasons, and even if they drop out or they don't get selected anymore, they retire, what tools am I giving them that they can use in everyday life? And great coaching is all about influencing people, that it's not just on the court, it's actually changing the way people think that they can use off court. And that's effective coaching.
I'm really glad you said that, Mark, because that was something that was just, well, actually, I think you've stemmed that in those thoughts in my head, reminder that these principles and practices, these elements of PDS, they're transformational in terms of if you apply them to all areas of your life. And if you really want to bring them to life on a performance level as a player, then you'll adhere to them off the court with your nutrition, your sleep, your daily habits, what you do on a daily basis, choices you make away from the basketball court or the field of play, which will ultimately have a massive impact on what you do when you get on the field of play. But the wider impact to society, Mark, I think, is very often overlooked by coaches. If you look at sport as a domain that can have a positive influence on society, these PDS principles and concepts are absolutely critical in order for people to enhance society better. Because you're talking about making better decisions, informed decisions, not emotional and led decisions, and decisions that will have a positive impact on somebody else. Effective communication. To be honest, Lace, and I'm not sounding soppy either, Mark, but I've taken some of these into my relationships with other people, be it in the workplace, be it in the family, and starting, like Mark says there, you start with the concept, start with the end in mind. Now, what type of emotional state do I need to be in order to get the desired outcome of this interaction with this person? That's not always with a player or another coach. Could be with my assistant coaches, could be with my partner, could be with a manager. But I think that often gets overlooked, Mark, is the impact and the powerful effect PDS can have on an athlete away from the basketball court.
Well, that's the point, Lace. And if somebody doesn't switch it on and off, they're living it. It has meaning to them. You shift to human behavior. If they just turn it on when coach is looking at them, you've done nothing. it's surface level, you haven't impacted on them. So under pressure, reality is they'll revert back. So if we can get people actually recognizing and understanding, I can use this anywhere, and actually the more I use it, the better I get, then we're winning right then. But it's supporting coaches to understand the how to do that.
Can I add one more thing, Lace? And it
Yes.
sounds like you want to round up, but I'll add one more thing, Mark, which we didn't talk about, and it could be for coaches out there, because I'm thinking, what would I be thinking right now with these PDS principles? Lace, and you actually touched off at me with a question earlier, and I didn't answer it, but it's probably a long-winded answer, so we can get into it another time. But working with a team, a staff, like to bring these principles to life with players has one challenge. But actually to do it with, if you're a head coach of a national team or a pro team, and you've got a staff of assistant coaches, a physio, a strength and conditioning coach, an owner of a club, a management of a club, there's a whole nother domain there. And I mean, Mark, that would probably be coaches needing to reach out to yourself in terms of, well, how do you manage that process? Because that's a whole nother podcast, really. That's a whole nother clinic or a whole nother hour and a half interaction. But definitely, I think someone out there is listening, thinking about, well, actually, yeah, I can do this, or I can do it with my players, but it's not enough. If it's not all the influencers who's going to have an interaction, who's going to be involved in that player's journey, if they're not versed in this stuff, then you meet conflict. It's like a kid going from one lesson to the other, and the teaching methods are different. There's confusion and there's inconsistencies.
Well, let me also add something too, which you from an American coach perspective, is that the parents as well. I mean, obviously the parents at the club, at the club level, but for a scholastic coach like me, the parents as well. And that's been a challenge in the past for me, was getting my parents to understand the paradigm that we're trying to implement as a coaching staff at the school I'm at, versus old paradigms that they have, that competitive, fear-based model. So, you're right. That's probably whole nother discussion we could have just on, how do you address those, and how do you get your coaches and everyone to be on board with you as you implement these changes, because you're going to run into resistance. You're going to run into people that don't agree with that. And so again, do you work with them? Do you help them try to bring them on, to bring them on board? Or at a certain point you say, hey, this, or they self-decide whether or not they want to be a part of it?
Yeah, it's one of those things, Lace. I mean, one of the things we do on the online as well, I do online team support for the full team, not just for an individual coach. But what's beautiful is the principles we've talked about, where we've mentioned the mentor uses the same with the coach, the coach uses the same with the player, the coach uses the same with the parents. It's getting them to see the lighthouse, getting them to see their impact, the value, sharing the journey with them, how they can help, how we need to change, getting the dialogue from, not preaching to parents, getting them involved, get dialogue going, get them to understand their huge value within this whole journey, and getting them to understand this will impact on my child's education, on my child tidying their room, on their child being honest and having a good dialogue with me as a parent. Fantastic. So that's part of the support, the buy-in. When we talk about seeing the value, it's not just the players and the coaches, it's everyone of influence, including the AD, including the parents. It's everybody. Excellent.
This has been a wonderful session. Mark, Alan, I really appreciate you both coming back and spending time on this. And I agree, we could go on for hours and do multiple sessions on this, because I really believe that this is really a critical element for coaches, young and old. It doesn't have to be a young coach who's just trying to establish himself. This could be for any coach that recognizes, has a self-awareness that I can do a better job. I want to do a better job. I want to have a deeper impact on my players, and I just need help. And I just need someone to kind of help me see those areas. So again, Mark, Alan, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And please share any other questions you've got, guys, through social media, on Twitter at PDS Coach, or anything else. If you want to keep the dialogue going, keep it going.
Appreciate it, Lace, and it's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you again. I'm going to go ahead and end the session here. Hope everyone has an enjoyable evening or day wherever you are in the world.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you again.